more interesting releases conceptually that Big Finish have done this year is a novel adaptation of a Virgin New Adventures novel from the 1990s called Goth Opera. This is written by Paul Cornell, who would later go on to write the story Father's Day. He also wrote the original novelization for Human Nature and then its adaptation in Series 3. This was during Doctor Who's more adult period, during the Wilderness years, where the only people who were buying the books and buying the merchandise were older fans, so the expanded media accommodated to those older fans with more adult subject matter. Case in point, this cover of Goth Opera had to be censored in some territories because of Nissa's bloodied fangs here and some of the blood that goes onto the collar of her white shirt here. I'm also convinced that this image alone turned about 40% of Doctor Who fans in the 1990s bisexual. But for Goth Opera, that's kind of its main legacy, as being a more adult-centered Doctor Who novel in the 90s based around vampires. And that's where we find this adaptation adapted by Elizabeth Miles of Goth Opera in 2024. So this is set simultaneously in Manchester in the 1990s and also in Tasmania, where vampires who have connections to the history of the Time Lords are trying to resurrect their vampire leader, Yarvan, played by Mika Balfour, and you also got Ruath, played by Natalie Gumedi, here, who was also like a Time Lord vampire hybrid, who was best friends with the Doctor at the Time Lord Academy when they were kids. They're in Tasmania playing some cricket, and there's some weird goings-on nearby. People are going missing, students are going missing, young people are going missing. People are being hypnotised at night, and Nyssa gets a very unexpected knock at her hotel window. Let's play a quick clip from Goth Opera.
Come in.
I just wanted to say good night and say sorry about earlier. I shouldn't have snapped at you.
You've been through a lot, and it's hard not to reach out when you see a friend in pain.
Thank you.
I prefer to call it kindness.
Not really used to that either.
The Doctor and I are here for you, whatever you need. If you like, I can tell you about Earth's current cosmological ideas. It's all quite fascinating.
I'll take a pass on that. But thanks for the offer.
Anytime.
Sleep well, Nyssa.
Good night. Hello? Who's there? Just the wind.
Hey, should open the window. It's a bit cold out here.
You're flying.
Oh no.
What are you?
Come on, love, it's freezing. Let us in. I'll be happy to explain everything.
Maybe it would be better if you...
Let me in.
I'm not...
There's nothing to be afraid of. Just let me in.
I'll let you in.
Oh, phew. Oh, thanks, love. Oh, I thought Australia would be warmer.
It is, during the day. Who are you?
Jake, you've got an interesting mind. It's almost like you're telepathic. You're not human, are you?
How do you know?
You smell different.
Goth Opera is a book I've not read, so I can't tell you how it works as an adaptation. But what I was really kind of impressed by with Elizabeth Mouse's adaptation, and like I said, I don't know how much of this directly comes from the original novel, is just how well textured and nuanced the characters are, and how much material the actors have to work with in order to flesh out these characters who, we were talking earlier about Master Planet Doom, and how the supporting characters really just felt like red shirts, and there wasn't really an awful lot to them, despite this being a 3-hour story, and we're following them on this expedition, this adventure. For Goth Opera, in a slightly shorter span of time for these characters. It feels like characters like Jake, played by Nathan Jonathan in that clip. You also have Maddie, played brilliantly by Lydia Wilson, these Mancunian teenagers who are turned into vampires and sort of start embracing that side of their personality. They feel like fully fleshed out characters, like really interesting three-dimensional characters who had an interesting life before the events of the story, before they became vampires, and then they build upon that over the course of the story while still not losing sight of all of these other dynamics that are happening. Nyssa gets turned into a vampire quite early on, so it's a case of the Fifth Doctor and Tegan trying to find a way to reverse her transformation, and Nyssa fighting off the blood-sucking urges that are now becoming intrinsic to herself. You've also got this dynamic between the Doctor and this Time Lord companion from their childhood. You've got the vampire lord there. You've also got a really interesting prequel narrated by Richard Armitage as who we've dubbed on these live streams Hot Rassilon, doing like a prequel backstory of the war between the Time Lords and the vampires. This isn't really goth opera featuring Richard Armitage. This is just Richard Armitage, getting the spotlight for 3 or 4 minutes when the story starts and then never turning up again. But there's still some really interesting like Time Lord lore and potential retcons depending on how seriously you take the canon of these adaptations or the Virgin Adventures novels from the 1990s anyway. I think there's some really strong characterization. I think that it's a really great story for the Fifth Doctor in particular, especially when it comes to the dynamic with the companions and also the subplot where the Doctor and Tegan joined this evangelical Christian group of crusaders who are trying to get Satan out of the Australian and the American heartlands. It's a really interesting subplot, and I think that any other Doctor would have like put a stop to it immediately or would have like figured a way out of it immediately. But with the Fifth Doctor being much more passive and a lot more meek, it allows the situation to get significantly worse before it gets a lot better. It's an interesting subplot. I do think that particular angle of the story does fizzle out a little bit, like, that kind of feels like a plot thread that was left dangling quite a bit. That being said though, goth opera was a really, really enjoyable and engaging dramatic piece of Doctor Who that's, at the beginning it says that it's more adult subject matter, it's not suitable for younger listeners. You could get away with this if you're like watching this and you're 12 or 13 years old. There's a killer cliffhanger at the ending of part 1 that's really, really strong and genuinely quite scary. I would have loved to have seen this if this was like actually adapted faithfully in the 1980s, timey-wimey stuff. Let's adapt a novel that's going to be written in 10 years from now. I think Sarah Sutton is really strong in this. I think this is one of her best performances with Big Finish for some time. She's given a lot of material to work with, and the idea, of course, you attribute this to Paul Cornell, but the idea of Nyssa, out of all of the characters in this TARDIS team, becoming the vampire, sort of like the mild-mannered, sensitive, empathetic scientist character, all of a sudden having these animalistic urges that are more laid in the mysticism and the fantastical than science. That's a really, really interesting conceit for the story, and I think that Sarah Sutton plays that so well. Janet Fielding's great, Peter Davison's great, but this is the Sarah Sutton power hour in particular. I think that Josh Snares will get an awful lot out of this story in particular. The cast are great. I think that, like I said, Lydia Wilson is terrific as Maddie. I think that Mika Balfour is really terrific as the Vampire King Yarvin. I think he's got such like a great charm and a real great authority and presence over the course of the story. Really, really brilliant, authoritative voice. Really, really effective. And there's some really great stuff with Ruath as well, this Time Lord character played by Natalie Gumede. I think that her and Peter Davison share a really fun and interesting dynamic in part 6. I kind of wish that maybe there was more of that over the course of the story itself. But yeah, goth opera was a really enthralling listen. Like, as someone who's not read the book, I have no idea if this is a faithful adaptation. I don't know exactly what is original from Lisbeth Miles's adaptation or what's been changed or anything from Paul Cornell's original novel in the 90s. But in terms of this being just a standalone, slightly like teenage or older audience orientated story, it really hits it out of the park. I really liked this. This was really strong. With the exception of the ending, I don't quite know how the Doctor won the day at the end. I think that was a little bit muddled. I listened to the final parts like twice, and I don't know how the story ends. I don't know. I think the journey leading up to it's terrific, and like I said, like, the supporting characters and the actors are really, really strong. But that ending, I was like, wait, what happened here? 1 minute the Doctor was like fighting off the vampires, and all of a sudden they won. What happened here? But yeah, my notes: 9 out of 10. Needed more Hot Rassilon.